A small hand shot out and grabbed the man's boot. He stopped cold. Down in the snow, two children were curled against a fence post. The girl couldn't have been 7. She had a baby wrapped tight against her chest, both of them blue at the lips, shaking so hard their teeth rattled. She wouldn't let go of that baby. Not for anything. The man knelt down. His knees cracked in the frozen mud. He asked her one question. "Where's your mother?" The girl looked up at him with eyes too old for her face. And she said the words that stopped his heart. "Mama left us here last night. She's not coming back." His name was Cole Barrett. He had spent 10 years making sure he needed no one, and no one needed him. What he did next stopped that whole town cold. Stay with me on this one. The town was called Ember Creek. It sat at the bottom of a valley, and in the deep of winter it was about the meanest place a man could stand. Snow up past your knees. Wind that cut through wool like it wasn't even there. The kind of cold that kills slow, and then all at once. Cole Barrett had ridden in the night before. He wasn't from there. Truth is, he wasn't from anywhere anymore. 10 years back he'd had a wife and a little house and a life that made plain sense. Then a fever came through in the spring and took her in 4 days flat. 4 days. After that, Cole stopped putting down roots. He drove cattle. He broke horses. He took the hard jobs in the empty places, and he kept moving. Because moving meant you didn't have to feel much. And not feeling much had kept him alive. So you understand the kind of man kneeling in that snow. This was the last man on earth who should be looking after 2 children. He'd spent a decade making sure his heart had no doors in it. No way in. No way out. But that little girl wouldn't let go of his boot. And she wouldn't stop looking at him. "What's your name?" he asked her. "Sarah," she said. Her voice was thin as paper. "This is Eli. He's my brother. He's 1." Cole looked at the baby. The little thing wasn't even crying anymore, and that scared him more than anything. Babies that stop crying in the cold are babies running out of time. He knew that much. He looked up and down the empty road. Not a soul. Just shuttered windows and smoke curling from chimneys where warm people sat in warm rooms, minding their own business. He'd knocked on 2 doors already that morning, before he ever found the children. A man needing directions. Nobody had answered. In a town like this, in weather like this, folks learn to keep their doors shut and their eyes down. That's the kind of place it was. Now here's the thing about Cole Barrett. He had a rule. His rule was simple. Don't get involved. You ride through, you do your work, you ride out, and you leave people's troubles where you found them. That rule had never once failed him. He almost stood up. He almost said, "There's a sheriff's office up the road, they'll see to you." He had the words right there in his mouth. Then Sarah did something that broke him clean in half. She took one of her frozen little hands off her brother, and she held it out, and she tried to give Cole the only thing she had. A button. A plain wooden button, worn smooth, that must have come off a coat somewhere along the way. "For helping," she whispered. "Mama says you always pay a man for helping." Cole stared at that button in her shaking palm. 10 years of walls, and this tiny thing knocked the first stone loose. He didn't take the button. Instead he took off his own coat, his heavy sheepskin coat, the only real warmth he had, and he wrapped it around both children at once, baby and all. Then he scooped them up off the ground like they weighed nothing. "Keep your button, darlin'," he said, low. "This one's on me." He carried them down the street toward the only building with lamps lit at that hour. The town's boarding house. His boots crunched hard in the snow, and the whole way, Sarah kept her eyes locked on his face like she was memorizing it. Like she'd been let down before and was waiting to see if he'd be one more. He wasn't going to be. He didn't know it yet, not fully. But he wasn't. Because somewhere between that fence post and that door, Cole Barrett had already broken his one rule. And a man who breaks his one rule for a child. Well, that man's whole life is about to change, whether he's ready or not. He kicked the boarding house door with his boot. Once. Twice. Hard enough to wake the dead. "Open up," he called out. "I got 2 young ones half froze out here. Open this door." The door swung open. A woman stood there in a shawl thrown over her nightclothes, a lamp shaking in her hand. Della Mayfield. She ran the boarding house, she'd buried 2 husbands, and she did not scare easy. But she took one look at what Cole was carrying and her face went white. "Get them in here. By the stove. Move." Cole laid the children down on the rug by the iron stove, and Della was already moving, blankets, a kettle, her big rough hands working fast. She peeled the frozen wet things off the baby and rubbed his little arms and legs until, finally, thank God, the child let out a thin wail. That's it, Della breathed. Cry, baby. You cry all you want. That's the sound of living. Sarah wouldn't let anyone hold Eli but her. Even shaking, even half-frozen, she kept those arms locked around him. It took Della a full 10 minutes and a cup of warm broth before the girl finally let the woman take the baby to warm him proper. Cole stood back against the wall with his hat in his hands and watched. He told himself he'd done his part. He'd carried them here. That was more than most would have done. He could leave now. He didn't leave. Instead he crouched down by Sarah while she sipped that broth, and he asked, real quiet, "Honey, what's your mama's name?" "Ruth," Sarah said. "Ruth Calloway. We came here when the leaves fell off. Mama got work washing and sewing." "And your papa?" Sarah shook her head. "Papa died before Eli was even born." Cole nodded slow. "So it was just your mama, taking care of you both." "There was a man," Sarah said. And something in the way she said it made Cole go still. "He came to our door lots of nights. Mama didn't like him. She'd send me to the back room with Eli and tell me to be quiet as a mouse. One time I heard her crying. One time I heard something break." Cole kept his voice even. "You know this man's name?" "No. But he had a shiny thing on his coat. Like a star." Now here's where the cold in that room turned into a different kind of cold. Because Cole Barrett had been in enough towns to know exactly what a shiny star on a man's coat meant. And he knew that whatever this was, it just got a whole lot bigger than two children by a fence post. Right about then, the door opened again. A man stepped in, stamping snow off his boots. Broad through the shoulders, gray at the temples, a heavy coat. And on that coat, catching the lamplight, a badge. "Sheriff Tom Hollis." "Della," he said. Heard there was a commotion. Then his eyes landed on the children, and something flickered across his face. Fast. But Cole caught it. "Well now. The Calloway young ones. We've been wondering where they got to." "Their mother left them in the snow to die," Cole said flatly. The sheriff sighed like a man who'd seen it all. "That woman. I'm sorry to say it in front of the little one, but Ruth Calloway was trouble from the day she rode in. Owed money all over town. I expect she lit out in the night and figured the kids would slow her down." He shook his head. "It happens more than you'd think, mister. Women like that." Cole stood up slow. "Women like what?" Hollis smiled, but it didn't reach his eyes. "You're not from here. You don't know the story. Tell you what, leave the young ones with me. Come morning, I'll send them down to the county home in Laramie. They'll be looked after proper. It's all handled." And there it was. All handled. 2 words said too smooth, said too quick. Cole looked at the sheriff. Then he looked at Sarah, who had gone dead silent and was staring at that badge with a kind of terror no 7-year-old should know. And Cole understood something in his gut, even if he couldn't prove a word of it yet. He stepped between the sheriff and the children. "They're staying with me tonight," Cole said. The room went quiet. Della froze with the baby in her arms. "Now friend," Hollis said, his voice cooling. "I don't think you understand how things work in my town." "I understand fine," Cole said. "I found them. I'll answer for them tonight. You want to send them anywhere, you can do it in daylight, in front of God and everybody. Not in the dark." For a long moment the two men just looked at each other. Then Hollis smiled again, tipped his hat, and backed toward the door. "Suit yourself, Drifter. We'll talk in the morning." And he was gone into the snow. Della let out a breath she'd been holding. "Mister, you got any idea what you just did? That man runs this whole valley." "I got some idea," Cole said. But the truth is he was tired, and the fire was warm, and the children were finally safe. Sarah had crawled over and fallen asleep against his leg, her hand fisted in his shirt. The baby slept in Della's arms. The wind outside had finally died down to nothing. The storm had passed. Cole leaned his head back against the wall and let his eyes close. Just for a minute, he told himself. Just for 1 minute. The hard part was over. Come morning he'd sort it out, see the little one settled somewhere decent, and be on his way like always. For the first time in 10 years, Cole Barrett felt something close to peace. He should have known better. The pounding came just before dawn. Not a knock. A fist. Fast and frightened, rattling the door in its frame. Cole was on his feet before his eyes were fully open, one hand already going for the pistol on his hip. Della threw the door open. A boy half fell inside, one of the stable hands, couldn't have been more than 14, his cheeks raw from running in the cold. "Miss Della," he gasped. "They found her." Down at the creek bend. Under the ice. He bent over, hands on his knees. It's the Calloway woman. It's Ruth. She's dead. She's been dead a while. The room went dead silent. And then, from the corner by the stove, a small voice. Mama. Sarah was awake. Sitting up. And she had heard every single word. Now here's where this whole story turns. So stay with me. The sheriff had stood in that very room a few hours before and said Ruth ran off. Lit out in the night to save her own skin and left her babies to freeze. But Ruth Calloway hadn't run anywhere. She'd been in that creek. Under the ice. The whole time. Which meant one of two things. Either the sheriff was flat wrong. Or the sheriff was lying. And Cole had watched the man's face when he told that story. He already knew which one it was. Cole crossed the room and gathered Sarah up before she could bolt for the door. She fought him for a second, then just collapsed into his chest, crying that terrible broken cry of a child who's lost the only person who ever loved her. Cole held on. He didn't say it's all right, because it wasn't. He just held on. By the time the sun came up gray over the ridge, half the town had gathered at the creek bend. They'd pulled Ruth Calloway out onto the frozen bank and laid her on a board. Cole stood over her while the deputy, a young fella named Briggs, kept saying they ought to get her in the ground quick. No sense in folks gawking, he said. No sense troubling everybody. But Cole had seen death before. Plenty of it. He'd seen what cold water does to a body, and he'd seen what a man's two hands do to a body, and those are not the same thing. He crouched down beside her. She didn't drown, he said. Loud enough to carry. Briggs went stiff. You don't know that. There's no water in her mouth. No ice in her throat. And there's a wound on the back of her skull that no creek ever made. Cole rose to his feet and turned to face the crowd. This woman was dead before she ever touched that water. Somebody killed her. And then somebody stood up and told you all she abandoned her own children. I'd wager it was the same man. The murmur went through that crowd like wine through tall wheat. An old man near the front, silver-bearded, leaning on a cane, spoke up in a voice like gravel. My granddaughter wears a coat that woman sewed. Ruth Calloway was no runaway. A few heads nodded. A few more found the courage to nod after that. That's how it goes. One person says the true thing out loud, and suddenly everybody remembers they knew it all along. All right. If you've stayed with me this far, do me one small favor. Hit that subscribe button and stay right where you are. Because what happens in the next few minutes is where this story stops being sad. And starts being something else. That's enough. The voice cut clean across the creek bank. Sheriff Tom Hollis came shouldering through the crowd, and his face was not smooth anymore. It was hard. This man's a drifter. Rode in yesterday. Nobody knows him from Adam, and now he's spinning murder tales over a woman half of you know ran up debts all over this valley. He pointed at Cole. Don't listen to him. Then tell me, Cole said, how a woman who ran off in the night ended up dead in your creek. Hollis didn't answer that. Instead his eyes moved. Off of Cole. Onto Sarah, standing there small in the snow with her brother bundled in Della's arms behind her. That child, Hollis said, is a ward of the county now. Both of them are. Briggs. Take the young ones into custody. And that's when Cole understood the whole thing. Cold and complete. The sheriff didn't want those children safe. He wanted them gone. Because Sarah had been in that house. Sarah had seen the man with the star on his coat come to her mama's door, night after night. Sarah was the one living witness who could put Tom Hollis in that house. And a man who'll kill a mother. Well, he won't lose a wink of sleep over her children. Cole stepped in front of the girl. Nobody's taking these children anywhere, he said. Briggs looked at Cole. Then at the pistol on Cole's hip, sitting easy under his hand. Then back at the sheriff. And the young deputy didn't move. Briggs. Hollis barked. There's a lot of folks watching, Tom, Briggs said quietly. Hollis's jaw worked. His hand drifted toward his own gun, slow, the way a man does when he's deciding whether he's willing to cross a line he can't uncross. The whole crowd felt it. Nobody breathed. For a long moment, nothing on that creek bank moved. The sheriff's hand hovered over his gun. Cole stood in front of the children, easy and still, the way a man stands when he's already made up his mind about what he's willing to do. Then a voice came from the back of the crowd. Della's voice. Tom Hollis. She pushed forward, and in her hand she held a folded piece of paper, water-stained and worn soft. This morning, I went to wash the baby's blanket. And I found this sewed up inside the hem. Ruth's own handwriting. That poor woman was so scared she hid her words where she thought nobody'd ever look. Against her baby's heart. The crowd went silent as a grave. You want me to read it out, Tom? Right here? In front of everybody. Hollis's face had gone the color of ash. Give me that. I don't think so, Della said, and she stepped back. And that's when Sarah did the bravest thing Cole ever saw a soul do. This little girl, 7 years old, who'd been frozen half to death not 12 hours before, she let go of Cole's leg. She walked out into the open. And she lifted one small arm and pointed it straight at the sheriff. That's him, she said. Her voice didn't shake. That's the man with the star who came to our house. That's the man who made Mama cry. I saw him. I saw him the night she went away. Every eye on that bank turned to Tom Hollis. And the man broke. He lunged, not at Cole but past him for the girl, his big hand grabbing for her arm to drag her in front of him. Cole moved before he'd even finished the thought. He caught the sheriff's wrist and turned it hard, and the two men went down together into the snow. Hollis was bigger. But Cole had 10 years of hard road in his hands, and he had something the sheriff didn't. He had a reason. He drove his forearm across the man's throat and pinned him, and when Hollis clawed for his pistol, Cole ripped it out of the holster and flung it across the ice out of reach. It's done, Cole said in his ear, low and cold. It's done, Hollis. Look around you. It's done. The sheriff bucked once more, then went still, breathing hard, staring up at a ring of faces, his own townspeople, looking down at him like they'd never seen him before in their lives. Then Della read the letter. She read it out loud in the cold morning air, every word. Ruth Calloway had written it 3 nights before she died. She wrote that the sheriff had been coming to her door for months. That he'd told her a widow with no man to speak for her had best keep him happy, or he'd see her run out of town and her children taken from her. She wrote that she'd told him no. That she'd said she would write to the circuit judge and the marshal down in Cheyenne and tell them everything. And she wrote that she was afraid that a man with a badge and no conscience might do anything to keep her quiet. She'd been right to be afraid. When Della finished, there wasn't a sound but the creek water moving under the broken ice. Somewhere in the crowd a woman started to weep. Then another. Not just for Ruth. For all the times they'd told themselves an easy story because the truth cost too much. Cole didn't say anything. He'd learned a long time ago that some silences do more work than words. 2 of the men from the crowd stepped forward, big farmers thick through the arms, and they took hold of Tom Hollis, and this time nobody argued about who had authority over who. Briggs took the sheriff's badge off his coat himself. His hands were shaking. There's a U.S. Marshal comes through Laramie the 1st of the month, Briggs said. We'll hold him till then. In his own jail. He looked at Cole. Mister. I'm sorry. I think a lot of us knew something was wrong in this town. We just didn't want to be the one to say it out loud. Cole didn't answer him. He'd already turned away. Because Sarah was standing there in the snow, and now that it was over, all that bravery had run out of her at once. She was just a little girl again. Shaking. Looking up at him. He knelt down in front of her, the way he had by the fence post. Only this time he didn't ask her anything. He just opened his arms. And Sarah ran into them, and buried her face in his shoulder, and this time when she cried, it wasn't the crying of a child who'd lost everything. It was the crying of a child who'd finally found somewhere safe to put it down. Cole held her, and over her shoulder he looked at the baby in Della's arms. And something in his chest that had been locked up tight for 10 long years cracked all the way open. The marshal came on the 1st of the month, just like Briggs said. He took Tom Hollis away in irons, south to Cheyenne to stand trial for the murder of Ruth Calloway. Della's letter went with him, folded careful in an envelope. Sarah didn't have to stand up in front of any judge. Cole made sure of that. The letter, and the wound that no creek ever made, and a whole town that had finally found its voice, that was more than enough. Word came back from Cheyenne that summer. Tom Hollis was found guilty, and he'd hang for what he did. Some folks in Ember Creek carried a shame over it. Shame that they'd let one man run their town on fear for so long, that a widow had died for want of anybody willing to stand up. But shame can be a fertile thing, if you let it grow into something better. Briggs took over as sheriff, and he turned out fair and honest, maybe because he never forgot the morning he almost wasn't. The town got gentler after that. Kinder to its strangers. Ruth Calloway did that, in a way. Even gone, she left the place better than she found it. But that's not really the end of the story. Because the same question was still sitting there. The same question that started the whole thing by that frozen fence post. What happens to the children? There was still talk of the county home down in Laramie. It was the proper thing, folks said. The orphanage would take them, feed them, raise them up. And I'll be honest with you. For about a day and a half, Cole Barrett thought about riding out. That was the old instinct talking. The one that had kept him moving for 10 years. Don't put down roots. Don't get attached. Attached things get taken from you, and then you're left standing in an empty house wondering how to breathe. He'd buried that lesson deep. It wasn't going to dig itself out easy. He saddled his horse on the third morning. He told himself the children would be fine. Della loved them. The town would look after them now, out of guilt if nothing else. He didn't owe anybody a thing. He'd done more than his share. He got one boot in the stirrup. And then he heard it. Behind him. Small feet in the snow. Sarah. Standing in the road in a coat 2 sizes too big, holding Eli's hand. The baby could walk a few wobbly steps now, unsteady as a colt. She didn't cry. She didn't beg. She just looked up at him, the same way she had that first morning. Like she was waiting to see if he'd be one more person who left. And she held out her hand. And in her palm was that button. That plain little wooden button. For helping, she said. You never took it. Cole looked at that button for a long, long time. Then he took his boot out of the stirrup. He walked over, and he knelt down in the snow in front of those 2 children one more time. But he didn't take the button. He closed her small fingers back over it, gentle. You keep that, he said. You keep it, and you hold on to it. Because a man doesn't take payment from his own family. Cole Barrett didn't ride out of Ember Creek that morning. Or the next. Or ever, as it turned out. He took work at a horse ranch on the edge of town, and by spring he'd put a down payment on a little place of his own. Nothing much, a house and a barn and a stretch of grass. Della helped with the baby when he was out breaking colts. Sarah started school that fall and turned out sharp as a tack. And every night, without fail, that little girl checked twice that the fire was banked good and warm before she'd let herself sleep. Some habits, the cold puts in you deep. Cole never once told her to stop. They didn't talk much about Ruth. But they didn't forget her either. Cole planted a rosebush by the porch, and he told the children it was their mama's, and come summer it bloomed red against the white house, and that was enough. Years later, and this is true, when Sarah was grown and getting married, she pinned something to the inside of her wedding dress, down low where nobody could see it. A plain wooden button. Worn smooth. And when the preacher asked who gives this woman away, it was Cole Barrett who stood up, gray now and slow in the knees, and said, I do. Her father does. He'd spent 10 years making sure he needed no one, and no one needed him. And then, on the coldest morning of the year, a small hand reached out of the snow and grabbed his boot. And it saved his life. Not hers. His. Funny how that works. Sometimes the person you stop to rescue is the one who ends up rescuing you. That's the story of the drifter, and the little girl, and the button he never took. A family that started at a frozen fence post, on the coldest day of the year.